Hi, today's guest on A Life and a Living podcast is Paul Edwards. Now, Paul is the author of Business Beyond Business, and he also is the host of the very successful podcast, Influencer Networking Successes. And of course, that's what it talks about, what it says on the tin, which is all about networking and how to be really effective at that. And we cover quite a wide range of subjects, but you really what you're going to get from this is how to go about networking effectively. Because for so many of us, it's an awkward experience. It's kind of, how do I start? How do I get going? How do I actually, really, be effective at it and make it work for me? And there's a mindset that we talk about that you really need to have to ensure that you're really successful at that. But also we want to make sure that the other thing we talk about is the absolute no-nos. What are the things you must not do? What are the things that, all of the things that we actually think about when we hear about a networking event and think about people scurrying around a room going from one-to-one, like speed dating, that are the absolute no-nos. But there are other things he talks about that you really must avoid. And the third is to, because the purpose of networking is about growing your business. And part of actually growing your business is how do you actually make an impact in your marketplace, however you define your marketplace. And that's a really critical part. And Paul has got some great views on that. So I really encourage you to listen to the podcast. There's lots of goodies. Also, Paul has very kindly given a page away. So there's loads of gifts and goodies. And there's a link in the show notes to that. So please, sit back and listen to Paul. If you want to get other great podcast interviews, there are some really super ones on the website. I encourage you to go there and discover them there too. So in the meantime, sit back and listen to Paul Edwards. Paul, thank you so much indeed for joining me here on A Life and a Living podcast. It's a real honor to have you.
John, it's my pleasure to be here. And as our mutual friend Hal Roach would say, when Irish eyes are smiling, they'll steal your heart away.
That's for sure. And I have heard him say that because I think he said it every night in Jury's Cabaret. Yep. You're the host of the Influencer Networking Secrets podcast. Now, when I think about networking, somehow in my mind I have this image of somebody running around a crowded room like a Duracell bunny handing out business cards, but that's not quite what it is. So I mean, for you, what's your definition of effective networking?
Effective networking, that's why I preceded with the word influencer, because I don't just want to network with people to swap products and hear the cash register go ka-ching. Certainly, that's a good feeling when you make money and succeed and persuade and all that kind of thing. But what really matters to me are the stories and the hearts and the souls of the people that I'm interacting with. So for effective networking, one of the way I approach it, I have, I call it the 5 ways of networking with dream connections. And, it's all about positioning yourself as almost like an unpaid publicist / personal assistant / therapist, if you, for lack of a better way of putting it. Which is to say, I'm always looking at what's the angle that this person is coming to a networking situation, a civic event, a function, a luncheon, whatever. Why are they here? And if that's the case, we can eliminate being salesy and transacting business from any sort of list of priorities. And we can say, okay, they're not here to transact business, but they are here for business reasons. Right. Another one that I'm fond of is what I call keep your ear to the ground, and this is kind of like being a scout, right? So when I do this, what I have in my head is a giant mental Rolodex of people and groups, associations, events, things that other people I know would potentially want to be a part of or would want to be introduced to, and I don't know particularly how I got it. This is what fascinates me, is people. And so I'm constantly juggling in my head. Okay, I'm meeting this person. You and I are having this conversation on a podcast right now. Eventually you're going to mention something that you need. And chances are I'm going to know somebody or somewhere or some scenario that's going to speak to and address that need.
So when somebody, because very often I find talking to people, particularly people starting out that are looking to kind of build and create and build a network, is how do they start? How do they actually start the process of, getting into the habit of networking? Because it tends also to be in spurts. So how do they actually start and sustain it? And then how do they go past kind of the first stage? Well, hey, I'm John Murphy and whatever, right? So beyond that, because that's actually what stops a lot of people. People go into situations and think, I just, I'm fine if I get going at the conversation, but how do I kick off the conversation?
Yeah, being an initiator is a totally different ball game than being the person who gets initiated. And so going back to what I mentioned about being somebody's therapist, right? There are 3 questions that I outline in my book, Influencer Networking Secrets, that I use in any situation where I'm, we're just getting to breaking the ice, we're just getting comfortable, we're just getting acquainted. And I haven't found them to fail me yet in any conversation where I've tried 1 or 2 or all 3 of them. And not necessarily in the order, but the questions they go something like this. Don't take my exact words, but they go something like this. The first question I'd ask somebody is, you get acquainted. My name's Paul, and you have a little surface chit chat, and then you can sort of casually say, "So, tell me what's really going well for you lately." Now, it's a question that you'd say, "Isn't that common sense?" No, it's not. Most people don't ask that question, right? Most people say something like, "What do you do?" or, "How's it going?" and that kind of thing. And that's just too vague. It's not specific enough. But now you're giving that, when you ask that question, you're asking somebody the quality of their experience in the now, right? So you're not asking them to think back decades ago. You're not asking them to think, even 90 days ago. You're saying, right in this moment, what's the best part about being you?
Yeah.
Right. Now that's an opener. The real meat that I found most of the time, this is, you ask the question, I'm going to answer it through the second question. And that is, you reverse that question. You say, okay, well, what's not going so well lately? Right. What's the hardest part of being you? And that opens the floodgates. Because as soon as they start answering that question, I have a mental notepad that begins making notes and saying, okay, who do I know who can fix that? What events do I know are coming up that this person would want to be at to help turn the tide, to create that? Because right, activity, positive marketing and business growing activity by an entrepreneur, executive, owner, it doesn't necessarily net a result directly from the activity you're doing, but if you do it, that result's going to come from somewhere. It's just the law of averages.
Because that takes a certain mindset, doesn't it? Because I was also reminded that very often people say, okay, well, I do the initial introduction, and somebody says, well, what do you do? So I'm an accountant. And there's a killer of a conversation, straight off, right? So it's, oh, fine, okay, that must be exciting. And where do you go with that? So that sort of open-ended question is a far better way of kind of starting the conversation. For some people I agree with you that, because the whole principle around networking and the right way of doing it is such a big part of marketing a business. Because at the end of the day, to me, marketing is about staying front of mind. So I've got to be on somebody's dashboard in some way that they think of me, when something comes up. And that takes a certain amount of activity. But in the current climate where, everybody is at home, no one can go out, the wheels still need to be turning. So how do people manage effective networking in this environment?
Well, I certainly think it's an age technologically unlike any other that we are able to have so many face-to-face encounters quote, holding up the quotes in the air for those listening on audio. Because of course you can't replace a true face-to-face in the flesh encounter. I'm not suggesting that's possible, but I both of us can remember easily within recent periods of our lifetimes where that just plain wasn't possible.
Yeah.
So the technology is there. The question to me, John, is always, okay, it's not simply do or die, whether or not, choose to use the technology or choose not to. It's also a matter of how you use it. And there's more than one way to do this. The way that I do it is pretty much the same way you're doing it, which is podcasting. Mm-hmm. And in that case, you're acting as a pro bono, I call it a pro bono publicist, right? Somebody who basically, instead of tooting their own horn with a podcast, instead of saying, look at me, look at what a great guy I am, look at all this knowledge and wisdom that I've accumulated. Instead, I'm going to put myself in the position of the seeker. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to interview people who are really, really good at what they do. And I'm going to try and get, a nugget of knowledge out of them in an intimate one-on-one conversation that hundreds or thousands or millions in some cases of people get to eavesdrop on. And so it performs a very educational sort of function there. But that goes back to the fact that human beings are all hungering for that. And so it's yes, you have to make the choice to use the technology. That's the very baseline. But you could also use the technology and be very boring.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a question of how you use it. And, there are other ways to do that besides podcasting. That's just the most.
Yeah. I think it is about having a mindset of adding value in every engagement point of contact that you have. Because I think that, the more you do that, and because I also, on the podcast, okay, as you say, I mean, I interview 80%, 90% of the podcasts I do, I'm actually interviewing somebody else. So to a large extent, I'm bringing other people to my network. But from my perspective, then I'm bringing value because they've got expertise that I don't have. So I'm bringing value then to my audience and to my network. And so it satisfies my need by actually bringing somebody else. But I think you've got to have the mindset that in each point of contact that you have with people in your network is, where can I add value? Where can I actually contribute? As opposed to, what can I get from it? And I think that in the way you go about it, I just think that comes across. If I was to ask you kind of, what are your, top 3, top 5 tips for networking, for really effective long-term networking, what springs to mind?
Certainly some of the ones we mentioned. So be an angler, right? Go to a function, go to a social occasion, go to an online Zoom meeting, assuming that the people that you're meeting are there for business reasons. And you can do some elementary guesswork, if you want to call it that. I prefer to think of it as, there's only so many things it could be, only so many reasons a person like this could want to be here. And then you can say, okay, what would be the chief reason an entrepreneur, executive, business owner, influencer would show up anywhere, right? Why would they show up? Assuming they're just like you, they're just coming as a guest. They're not, if they're hosting it, different story, right?
Yeah,
but if they're just showing up there, why? What would they possibly, what could they gain from it? And of course, the answer is the same thing you could gain from it. But if you are focused more on what they could get from it as opposed to what you could get from it, that gives me a boost. That gives me momentum, right? So there's that. There's done for you publicity. This is, I love this one. John Corcoran, a friend of mine, has a list of like 6 or 7 things you can do and you can do this with anyone. He pointed out doing it specifically for an influencer who's very difficult to reach, right? But you can interview them. You can do a video review. You can leave a testimonial. You can go to their events and meet them in person. You can buy their products and then endorse them and share them with your friends. These just little things, and they all say yes, my name is Paul Edwards, but I'm not here to talk to you about Paul Edwards. I'm here to talk to you about John Murphy. Let me tell you what a great guy John Murphy is. Let me tell you about his coaching. Let me tell you about his experience. Let me tell you about the depth and the breadth of the knowledge base that he has and how this has impacted my life and made a difference. So there's that. Those three big questions, what's going well for you, what's not going so well, and what are you looking forward to? And the thing that makes this happen, one day, what I found is I did this for months on end for just average local business owners I knew here in Olympia, Washington, when I was in the insurance business. But one day I found myself standing before a C-suite executive doing it and placing him strategically in significant local events that gathered huge numbers of the community as a means of creating that reciprocity between us to get something that I wanted from him.
Yeah.
Right. And then I found myself doing it for major online influencers in the fitness industry like Vince Del Monte. And then I found myself doing it for Aaron Walker, our mutual friend in ISI. It just keeps snowballing. And one day, next thing you know, you could well be doing this for some of the most recognizable names in the world.
Yeah. I think it is also in the principle everything matters and everything counts. And I think that's something to keep in mind. If you stand back from a kind of a commercial perspective, I mean, the purpose of networking is, to grow your network, obviously, but also to grow your business. Okay. So, and really what it's, in your business, it's about having that influence in the marketplace, however small or big that might be and how you define it. But having that influence, how do you actually achieve that? I know you talk about that, but how do you actually achieve that kind of position of, that you are having an influence, that you are seen as an expert, and that actually is then kind of supporting the growth of your business?
The phrase that I like to use for this, John, it goes like this: create your own unpaid sales force. And what I mean by that is you start with one, but you keep doing this. And this is how Aaron came along and changed everything for me. I was interviewing one person after another, just building relationships, get them on that initial interview and then add value on the back end. And people say, well, how do you add value? Well, at the time I didn't have much to add, except I knew other incredible people that the incredible people who appeared on my podcast would want to know. Right. Yeah. So after Aaron first appeared on my podcast, I started introducing him to people because that was all I had. He didn't need money. He didn't need more publicity other than, he loves to go on podcasts very consistently. So I connected him with podcasts I knew about that he didn't know about. So if all you have is the existing group of people, right, you got to say, I always ask the question, what's in my hand? What could I do right now? I can introduce people to other people, right? So I just did that very methodically, very systematically, very consistently. And the next time Aaron came back, we had a great interview, but afterward he said, you need to let me do something for you because you've introduced me to all these wonderful people and you've never asked for anything in return. And I said, I wouldn't. And he said, I know, but you need to let me do something for you. Right. Well, see, it's counterintuitive, but that's the moment where you realize you have built influence is when that person unsolicited says, you need to let me do something for you. That's when you've planted the seed and it's germinated and now it's growing and pretty soon other people are going to begin to pick up on it as well.
What are the absolute no-nos when it comes to networking? What are the absolute pitfalls that you kind of shoot yourself in the foot and then you walk away thinking, I wish I'd never said that, done that, whatever it might be?
Well, definitely. I mean, let's get the obvious out of the way, being a pushy salesperson. Like I say, I don't do much local networking anymore. Most of my networking now is through podcasting and just online meetups with people. But then as now, if I go into that hoping to get a sale, got to close this client right away. If I go into it desperate, people can smell it. I mean,
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
If you've been around somebody like that, you know, right? So what makes you think you doing it yourself is gonna yield a different result? It's not. The other thing that I would say is that this is where introverts can really shine, because they don't like to talk all that much anyway. The other thing I would say is that if you can learn the discipline of holding your tongue, even when you get something, you got something good to say, right? You're like, oh, I have a story just like this. You might get a chance to share it. It might be appropriate, but understanding that rhythm of the conversation, and somebody's talking and they're telling a story and they're looking for, validation, for somebody to bear witness to it, somebody to, to marvel and appreciate the experience that they had and how they came out on the end of it. Again, this goes back to learning the ways of the therapist or the counselor. So, the flip side of that, the negative side of that, of course, is being, somebody says and you're just waiting, you're not listening, you're just waiting to respond. You're waiting to say what you have to say, right? Most of the time, that's sort of a conversation ender that leads that other person to a dead end, and they feel like I can't really go in subconsciously, right? They feel like I can't go any further with this person.
So if you were talking to a business owner or a senior executive that said, okay, I really need to get to grips, because people network unconsciously, right?
Yes.
They don't realize they're doing it. It's just kind of part of being a human being. But if you want to do it intentionally, which is really what we're talking about here, and somebody said, okay, I really need to get to grips with this, and I know that I'm, I don't do it, or I do it occasionally, or I do it in fits and starts, or whatever it might be. How would you, if you were taking something, say, okay, these are the things that you need to do. Here are the building blocks for you to actually get started? Because the starting place is not when you're in the room or in the Zoom call. The starting place is before that. So what do they need to do to get themselves ready and primed to be really effective at networking?
Great question. I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't get to talk about this very often, and that's why I say that. But the first chapter that I put forward in my book, I call it "Be a Magnet, Not a Pusher," and that's all. I mean, it comes from having what I call a monastic heart, and that's not a new term, but you have to approach this from a mindset of benevolent detachment. You have to be willing to let people come into your life, pass out of your life, engage with you, not engage with you, appreciate you, not appreciate you, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to be willing to in one ear, out the other, on one shoulder, slough it off on the other. You can't go in there with this attitude that I've got to make a connection today, right? You can't go in there with this, I've got to make sales, I've got to, it doesn't work that way. That's reducing it to a almost like a purely physical environment, and ignoring the highly spiritual currents that are at work in that same room. The background, the experiences, the attitudes, the levels of success, the personal issues people are dealing with, all of that stuff is what makes us so wonderfully complex. And if you can't approach that from a place of love and patience and forbearance and being willing to let it unfold at its own pace, not ignoring it, not just standing off to the side, not saying anything, but allowing people to come to you, and it'll happen. See, this is the thing. People say, well, what if I stand there in a room, nobody comes up to me? No. We are magnetic creatures. And we create polarity between ourselves and others. And the physical laws of magnetism have an excellent spiritual parallel for us, because if you take two magnets, right, and you put the positive to positive and the negative to negative, they're going to repel each other. But if you flip one of them and you put the positive to the negative and the negative to the positive, they lock in together, right?
Yeah.
Same thing in the spiritual, right? I've noticed this. If I go to a function, I went to Podfest in Orlando, Florida in March. If I go there and I sort of stand off to the side as this, tall, deep voiced, fairly extroverted, very confident guy, but if I stand off quietly to the side and sort of mind my own business, sooner or later, introverts will start walking up to me and making conversation with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's my polar opposite. My wife is left-brain, introverted engineer, computer software type of person. It's the same principle. You attract your opposite, and they are the most drawn to you.
Okay. And how do you go about it? So that's kind of going with kind of no agenda other than just being, to a large extent, right? How about if I'm in a situation whereby, okay, I want to meet the president of Coca-Cola, right? Just take an example. So I'm going to try and engage in networking. So how do you go about it then if you're okay, maybe that's a bad example, but how do you go if you targeted an individual that you really want to engage with? Is that the wrong thing to do?
Well, so targeting a prominent figure, the way that I do that is I first target the people standing next to them.
Right. Okay.
Because I've had people like Rabbi Daniel Lapin and John Eldridge on my podcast, and people see that and they're like, "How did you do that?" And I'm like, "Trade secrets, my son."
Right. Yeah.
But actually, it's not. It's an open secret. Most people don't look past their nose, right? And I'm not saying that derogatorily. I'm capable of exactly the same thing. What happens is, with any prominent person, take the president of Coca-Cola. That guy is not a lone wolf. He has an entire entourage, or that lady. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. They have an entire entourage around them of people you've never heard of.
Yeah.
But people who are just as eager to be asked their opinion, asked what's going well for them, asked what they, how they got to where they are, eager to share their expertise and knowledge. And that, to me, I don't like to classify people as stepping stones. That's not how I look at them.
No, okay, yeah.
But I'm just thinking, with John Eldridge, for example, I interviewed Morgan Snyder and Alan Arnold, who are two of his biggest right-hand men at Ransomed Heart Ministries. And both of them were happy to come on my show. In fact, Morgan's been on twice. And when the time came and he was releasing his book, his newest book, which was back in January, February, by that time I'd interviewed both of those guys. I'd also interviewed several other prominent people in the kingdom of God. And I was able to say, look, here's a guy who has read every book John Eldridge has ever written, who's a member of the Ransomed Heart tribe. I support it financially.
Yeah.
Who has interviewed two of his right-hand men. There was no reason for him to say no to that interview.
Yeah.
And he came right on. It was like magic. And I just say, if I wanted to meet the president of Coca-Cola, the very first people I would target is not the president. I would target everybody who's surrounding him.
Okay. So it's a combination of kind of a real strategic approach, but also of, just being the person who attracts the other people into their orbit. By being true to themselves as well, isn't it?
Authenticity. Yeah.
And authenticity is actually the key part.
Because you walk into, like, let's say I wanted to meet, this Coca-Cola president, and they've got an entourage of, I don't know how many people surround them that keep their affairs running and all that. If you can, what'll happen is, eventually one or maybe sometimes a few of those people encounter you, and they'll be like, I get this guy. I like this guy. I trust this guy. And the rest of them might well ignore you, not want anything to do with you. It doesn't matter. Once, your polarity and your magnetism will define who you're getting to talk to, and by extension, who they're willing to introduce you to.
That's great, because I think that, it's such a key area for business growth, and I think it's very undervalued and not spoken about as much as it should. So, listen, it's great to get these insights, Paul. Before we, you can share with us where people can get in touch with you. Two questions I ask everybody. One is a book other than your own that has had a significant impact upon you.
Well, one that I keep going back to time and time again, this is not really a business book, but it'll tell you a lot about what we just finished talking about, which was when you focus on being, right, who you are, being fully authentic, becoming the kind of person, not only on who you're being right now, but also on who you're becoming. Becoming the kind of person that attracts those, those key people to have conversations with you. It totally changes the game for you. So the name of the book is The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard.
All right. Okay.
And it's I'll be honest, if you're not a subscriber to the gospel, you might say, well, I don't really care. I don't really dig that stuff. But the principle that's laid out there is compelling. Whether or not, no matter what you think of Jesus or anything else like that, the principle, that the way he dives deep into the emphasis on being and becoming, it was, I've read the book probably 8 times in the last year.
Wow, in the last year.
I keep it. I mean, not in its full entirety, but I keep it with my Bible right next to it, because I'm like, when I come across passages and I'm like, I bet there's an explanation of this that helps me put meat on the bones for this. And 9 times out of 10, he has one.
Interesting. Very, very good. That's one for the list. Second question is daily rituals. What are they? I'm always fascinated by people's daily rituals, because my experience is that the vast majority of successful people I've met have them. They can all be different. But what are yours, and what do they do for you?
Well, not so long ago, I was getting up at, I've never been a late riser. I've always got up around, 6, 7 o'clock at the latest. But the reality of being in business and having a family and living at the pace that until recently we were living at was taking a toll on me. And I just decided, I'm going to, I can't just get up and walk straight into my day. It doesn't work that way. It's like anything else. Living a successful life is something that you're constantly training for. And if you look at professional athletes, John, maybe they take a month off each year, but that's it. I mean, the rest of the time, whether the regular season is in force, whether they're in the middle of the playoffs or whether they're in spring training or whatever you call it for each individual sport, they're training, they're practicing, they're preparing, they're laying down those neuropaths, those non-negotiables. And so for me, I said, what is abundantly evident is that if I get up 2 to 3 hours ahead of everyone else, and I spend time in the presence of God, and I just sit and read the word and pray and journal and think and let my soul acclimate itself to the day, then I'm not an unpleasant person to be around for the rest of it, which I was, right? I was just plain unpleasant for my wife, my kids, less so for people I met out in public, but I walked around with kind of a grim, gritting my teeth, just powering through life. And I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to come at it from a position of strength. So the practical, I started getting up at 4:30 and go downstairs. I don't check my phone. I don't do emails. I don't do social media. I just sit down and I read God's word for a while, and I journal. I have a handwritten journal. I have a digital journal. I write in both of them. I write my thoughts. I write my questions. I confess. I repent, et cetera, et cetera. And that takes me to about 6:30. And then on days when I'm not doing my intermittent fasts, I eat breakfast, and then and then I'm ready to come through and deal with managing doing my work, which requires intense concentration and focus, but also up until recently, making sure my kids were getting on the bus to school. Now, we're handling them at home full time.
Sure,
and so it's just a juggling act, but I do a lot better at it when I get that early start before they get up, before the world gets going, and without getting lost in my phone and.
I think it's that, morning rituals. I know some people kind of shift them and do them at different times. For me, it's about the morning time and kind of setting the day up. And the days that which would be very rare, but the days that I, for some reason, don't get to do it, the day just doesn't go right. The day just doesn't feel right. And I feel that I'm kind of chasing the day for the entirety of it. So it's not good. Paul, this has been great. Thank you. Where can people reach you?
I just remembered this, John. I'm going to have a special URL made for listeners to your show specifically. So the website is thepaulS, as in Simon, Edwards.com. And then we'll put it on / a life and a living.
Great. Thank you.
And so thepaulsedwards.com / a life and a living. You go there. I've got a couple of free giveaways, just some stuff that'll help you think about your goals, dreams. Also a spouse survey, so you can find out how your spouse really feels about you.
I don't need my wife to complete a survey. She tells me that whether I like it or not, it's completely unsolicited.
Oh boy, I got that. That triggers another Hal Roach joke. The 5 million men standing at the gate of heaven, and one man standing in this line, and St. Peter said, "Riley, why are you standing there on your own?" And Riley said, "My wife told me to stand here."
There's a lot of truth in that. I love it. Paul, this is great. So if they can get to you through that link, that we'll have that in the show notes. But thank you so much indeed for being with us today. It's been a real honor, and it's been a great interview, and with loads of content for everybody listening in. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.